remember the incredible achievement of the largest object ever dropped into fresh water when it hit the Detroit River in 1958. So if you will, I'm going to take you through just kind of a little history of this shipwreck and tell you a little bit more about the Fitzgerald. And because we probably have experts in the audience that know a heck of a lot more than I do, I'm going to defer, and if someone raises their hand and says, Rick, that fact is wrong, I'm going to say you're probably right. I just remember that I am a researcher. I'm a television reporter. I'm an author. I've made probably 13 different videos that have aired on PBS. I've been on the Discovery Channel, the History Channel, and I still know very little compared to the people who actually swung hammers and welders and actually steered the Edmund Fitzgerald. As I look into the audience, I see Dick Orgill, I see Pam, I see so many people that have an incredible wealth of information. I'm humbled by that amount of information, and I hope that we'll be able to bring some of that to the microphone as well. So let's look at this giant freighter, the Edmund Fitzgerald, 729 feet long, built right here where so many incredible freighters have been built. The William Clay Ford, the pilot house that we still have at Dawson Museum, was built here. The Alpina that I chronicled in my documentary called Cement Boat was launched right here. Sadly, the Cedarville was launched here. It sank in 1965 or 65, in May of 65 at the Mackinac Bridge. But so many of those freighters are still on the waters right now. So this is an incredible place. We had an amazing shipbuilding heritage right here at Great Lakes Engineering Works and all the way through Michigan. Bay City built incredible freighters too. The Daniel J. Morrell that was lost in 1966. And all kinds of warships that were very proudly serving several different navies, including the Coast Guard in the America and the Australian Navy, 3 different ships that were just sunk as underwater fish habitats not too long ago. So these ships that were built in Michigan, we can all be proud of these incredible things. Let's go to the next picture real quick. What's unique about the Fitzgerald, other than her size, was the fact that she was actually built or owned by 1.3 million people. It was owned by the Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company. It was the first time that it was an investment for them. They saw this incredible freighter. They thought, we can go ahead and build it, and we'll get somebody like Columbia Transportation to actually do the work on it. So 1.3 million owners, technically, on board the Edmund Fitzgerald. And if you look at the signature, on the right-hand side, the president was Edmund Fitzgerald. So that's where the name came from. This president who came out very frequently here to see the ship being built. I've got footage of that as well. Roscoe, we can go to the next slide. We'll take a look at the size of the Fitzgerald. It's so big that on its deck, you could put the Mayflower, the Nina, the Pinta, the Santa Maria, and the Ironclad Monitor on its deck. That's how big this freighter was. At the time, it was the biggest on the Great Lakes, and it surpassed several ships. We had a couple that were lengthened to 700 feet, but when she went to 729, it was only because the seaway had been lengthened for ships to go through. And they did some modifications on the MacArthur lock so she could actually fit. And when this ship squeezed through, it literally squeezed through. They built it to the maximum size. Now we've got locks that are a little bit bigger. We have 1,000-foot freighters that are out there now, over a dozen of these 1,000-footers that ply the Great Lakes. We don't see nearly as many freighters as we did back in the days of the Edmund Fitzgerald, but with 1,000-footers, we don't need to because they carry 3 times the cargo, really. When this ship left, let's see if we can, let's hit keel, sure. See this guy work? He's like multitask. I love it. Here's the keel lane when they put the very first plate of steel down right over here. Hull 301 was the number of the hull. There was only going to be 2 more hulls built after that, 302 and 303, which were the Homer and the Jackson. When they put this piece down, this is the backbone of the ship. All of these pieces would rest on this. And as we talk about what might have happened when that ship went down, there's a lot of suspect when we look at that keel and we talk about it being not structurally sound. But I'll tell you this, there's a lot of workers here that stand behind their work. And in my documentary, we talk to these workers who say they know darn well that there were people going out on this freighter, and that's something that they remembered as they did their work on board here. So when we talk about a faster production weld as this freighter went together, these people stood behind their work, and it was very impressive on what they did. When that piece of steel came together and they built that first platform, then they were presented with a problem of how are you going to get all these other pieces that come in together, and they came up with a really unique design in a way of launching separate hull sections, almost mini launches, if you will. They put together these giant pieces and then they swung those pieces into the water. So we'll see if this thing's going to advance to our next low. Looks like the DVD's having a little bit of problem. Can you go again, please? Here's those giant sections that are being launched into the river system. Yep. Our gremlins are at it already. You want to try another DVD player? Do you have the second one? It looked like it was breaking up a little bit. It made the speed of building the ship so much faster because they could build these subsections, launch them in, sail them down, pick them up with the giant gantry crane, and then build it almost like a modular set. So it was pretty impressive on how they put this together that quickly. And like I said, there would be 2 other freighters that would come out of Great Lakes Engineering Works. The Homer would be later lengthened, but then scrapped. And there's some question as to maybe it had some structural problems. And that's like what I said too, when I bring together people in a crowd like this from Verosco's event, it's interesting to find people in the audience. So if you have an opinion on that, if you've heard anything about the Homer and whether there were structural issues, it'd be interesting to talk to you about it. But literally those sections came together in such a way that they soon had a freighter. And once that thing splashed into the water, first it was big news in the Detroit Free Press and the news. I mean, everybody wanted to come out here. 20,000 people were gathering on these grounds to be able to watch that freighter go into the water. What do you think?
Give us about a minute.
Okay. You could lose the goofy guy on the screen, though. For me, this has been an incredible odyssey. I mean, when we look at starting a story, so many of us think that once you get it done and you put it into a box or it goes on to PBS, that's end. But it's not, because there's so many chapters. Now, when I did the 1913 storm, which next year we'll celebrate 100 years of a storm that started on, quite frankly, Friday of this week and lasted a weekend, we think of the Edmund Fitzgerald, we think of storm winds that kicked up to 60, 70 miles an hour, which is impressive. But the 1913 storm, they came up for 70 miles an hour and stayed for 15 hours straight. It devastated ports, wiped out all the port in Milwaukee. Chicago or Cleveland had so much snow, it just devastated the town. And sadly, freighters all across the Great Lakes were lost. 250 sailors were lost in the 13th storm in one weekend. And to show you how big the Great Lakes are, there's actually 5 of those ships that we haven't found. There's a schooner called the Plymouth. There's 2 500-foot-long freighters. They watched one sail out of Marquette called the H.B. Smith. They know where it's at, but they can't find it. And the Carruthers, the largest Canadian freighter ever on the Great Lakes at the time, was lost as well. We do have one of those ships that actually survived the storm that's in Toledo now that they just repainted, and they've got the Schoonmaker name on it. So if you ever get a chance to go and go to the museum that they're putting together in Toledo, it's now going to be the Maritime Museum of the Great Lakes. They actually have this freighter that survived the 1913 storm. For me, it was impressive because I was able to find a guy that actually was at the wheel when the ship went down. Can you imagine that? 97 years old. So, and then we think 1913, well, tomorrow will be the anniversary of the 1940 storm, which hit Lake Michigan with such fury, 126-mile-an-hour winds that slammed into the Lansing Shoals Lighthouse and blew the portholes out of it. And 4 freighters were in the way of that storm. When it first started, it actually started in Washington State. And it blew so hard it destroyed a suspension bridge. Have you ever heard of the Galloping Gertie Bridge? That was destroyed in the 1940 storm. So if you think about those winds coming in, blowing through Chicago, up Lake Michigan, and slamming into the Annecy Minch, a freighter that was just off Pentwater, it ripped it in half. It cleaned the deck houses off. There was no place for the crew to hide. And the ship sank in 40 feet of water. It was tragic. And another ship called the Davik, the captain was from Detroit. And they just rolled over in deep water, 200 feet of water, and went down. The Novadoc was a little better off. Sadly, the 2 cooks were washed overboard, but 17 people were saved by a fish tug that came into town. So we think about these storms, we remember the Fitzgerald, but we also remember that over 30,000 sailors have been lost on the Great Lakes. So it's pretty amazing. 5,000 shipwrecks in the Great Lakes, and we've only found about 800 of them. So there's a lot to be seen.
Where are we?
Let's go down to sections. Can you drop down to the part that's, or you can go to the launch. I already saw that. Can you go to the menu part? Or or go all the way over to next if you can. We'll move on. For November storms, the next big one after the 1940 storm was the Carl D. Bradley. In 1958, November 18th, freighter came up from Gary, Indiana, unloaded its cargo, and started. Here's one of those sections going in now. Unloaded its cargo, came up, and they were supposed to go park in Manitowoc. And the shipping company called up and said, make one more run. So the skipper had a choice. He could go through a big storm that was coming, or he could stay up by Cana Island, and he figured he'd push on. It was a bad call because that ship ripped in half. The cold temperatures were too much for the ship because it was built with pre-World War II steel. 1927 is when it was launched. It ripped in half and sank, and 33 lives were lost. 2 guys bobbed on a life raft overnight and were picked up by the cutter Sundew and rescued. So after that, 1966, the Daniel J. Morrell was built in Bay City, ripped in half, the same kind of steel in a storm. Its sister ship, the Townsend, was cracked in half. And they said, let's get it into port, and they wondered, well, should we sail it again? And the Coast Guard said, no, you can't sail that. Well, they went to scrap it, and on its way through the ocean, it sank. So 2 ships that were lost in this incredible storm. And also the Nordmere, another ship that had run aground in Alpena, had a crew on there that were watching the cargo. This giant storm that sank the Daniel J. Morrell came up. They had a hand-cranked radio, and they were calling for help. And a Coast Guard chopper from Detroit said, I think we can go get them, and flew 200 feet off the water all the way to Alpena, the very tip of the lower peninsula, all the way up there, almost out of gas, saw the people on there and lifted them off in 22 minutes and put them on the cutter Mackinac. It was an incredible rescue in '66. And then you think back on the tip of the thumb, here's Dennis Hale surviving the Daniel J. Morrell. On a life raft, the ship started to break in half, and he literally, all he had was his life jacket. Ran out because it was pitch black on the ship because it had broken. Freezing cold, his toes were squishing in the snow, November 28th. And the guy told him, run back in and get a coat on, you're going to be cold. And sure enough, he got thrown into the water with his coat on in his underwear, and that's it. And he made it. These incredible stories of survival. And I think that's what really made the Fitzgerald so much more puzzling. How is it that we had all these other storms, these incredible freighter crews that at least 1 or 2 survived, and we found so many of the crew sadly lost, but at least those families had that connection to them. You know, they could bury their lost ones. Unfortunately for the Fitzgerald, that just wouldn't happen. Can you go, let's go to next so we can keep on track if you think you can get past it.
Is it past this?
We'll show this real quick. This is a skeg. This is where the propeller went in. They're putting together all of the pieces. This is the stern section now. You can see how big that is. Look at the people down there. That's how big this ship is. When we dove it in the submarine was dwarfed by that giant propeller. And we were almost just astonished as we went around the back section and saw that giant blade to see a rope hanging there with knots in it. And it looked like it was actually the steward's crane. That's how they would load, the cook would load the ship on that little crane that was back where the cook would be. And it really brought a lot of thoughts in our mind as to why that was back there. And then, of course, we thought of the lifeboats. Why was one of them cut in half by that giant propeller? You know, we know that it had some trauma. It somehow ripped in 2. Was it because it swung back on a davit and literally was sliced in half by the prop? We don't know. They still don't know to this day why that life raft was cut in half, or the lifeboat, forgive me. The 2 life rafts, the inflatables, were found, but nobody was on them. Can you go to the next button? Can you get over?
It took 2 cranes to lift 1/2 of the boiler. So we took the 2 and all of they had 6 tons of rigging to pick those things up. And there was 1 piece of steel about maybe 20 feet long, and I was hooked to one end of it, and the other crane was hooked to the other, and it was middle. The boiler was hooked in the middle of that, and we'd have to raise that there straight up till we got it over the ship, and then swing the cranes. The other guy was more of an experienced operator than me, and he did the control of bringing the cranes together, and we had to bring those cranes, the bottom, almost together, and still we couldn't reach past the middle of the ship with it. And they'd have to put it on rollers and roll the boiler in place, and then later on come back here and put the other half of the boiler in.
You imagine the size of those gantry cranes. When they climbed up there, they'd bring their lunch because that was an all-day affair for those guys that were up in that crane. And to drop those boilers in, 60 tons apiece, this is one of the first ships that they actually launched with the boilers and the machinery inside the ship already. Usually they would put that in after fit out, so they'd bring the equipment in there and do it while she's sitting in the water. But this ship was literally, let's see if we can go down to the next one. Here's those boilers going in right now with that dance that the two cranes had to do to put it together. Literally stretching the two cranes to their maximum, trying to reach across the incredible width of the Edmund Fitzgerald and all of the hatches, the 22 hatches that are there. This is the size of that gantry crane. It made everybody nervous. I don't know of anybody that said it was really comfortable to be up there. It's always a thrill to be able to talk to people who've worked on these and to really give you some of the background. You know, for me, most of my discoveries going in to find this footage, this was actually in a library in a box called 301 GLEW. Nobody knew what it was. Luckily, I knew GLEW was Great Lakes Engineering Works, 301 was the hall number, so I realized that this was Fitzgerald. And I told the people at the library, could you just get this transferred? It was a reel of film. I said, would you please transfer it for me? And she goes, why? I said, oh, it's nothing. And she sent me up, she goes, you stinker, that's the Edmund Fitzgerald. And I said, you know, you can call the media, you can tell them that, that you have this footage, but, you know, technically I found it, it's your footage, do whatever you're going to do, but can you give me a lead of 6 months at least, so I can at least get my program together before you share it with the world. And surprisingly, there hasn't been another documentary with any of this footage in it. It was filmed by one of the guys from Great Lakes Engineering Works, one of the chief workers there, and literally it chronicles all of the major steps. Trying to push this giant boiler into place, I mean, just by millimeters to make it fit, and all of the different pieces going in. And it's nice to find shipyard workers that can actually tell me who these people are. When we were waiting for the train, I met one of the guys that actually was on the fit out, and I said, well, I've got all this footage, I want you to start naming people, because I have no clue who they are. I get lucky sometimes when I have newspaper photos that line up, and they'll say, like, this is the crew of, say, the cutter Escanaba, and I see the faces, and I remember the footage from 1937 that I have, and I can start to name some names. Well, there you go. Wendell Freeman, isn't it? And Edmund Fitzgerald. Out there to see his ship being launched. The story that I've heard about Edmund Fitzgerald is that his daughter said he'd never heard the song, which I find impossible, because Gordon Lightfoot, it was #2 on the charts. It was a huge song. In a time period when most songs were only 3 minutes long, here's this guy that comes out with a 6.5-minute song. The radio station DJs, quite frankly, love it because it gives us a bathroom break. These Beatles songs that are 2 minutes long are lousy because it takes a while for business. So we were very thrilled when the longer songs came out, but I wasn't even in radio yet. I started in radio in '82. And the song came out in 1976, inspired by a Newsweek magazine article that had come out that he saw, where somebody quoted Longfellow talking about the lake, it is said, never gives up its dead, and he was just moved by that and by the fact that they rang the bell in Detroit. And he talked about how that moved him to write this incredible song with so many details. And I'm so thrilled, Pam, that you're here, because 2 characters are mentioned throughout that song, the captain and the cook. And we have the cook's daughter here to talk about it. Can you at least talk a little bit about your dad? Do you mind sneaking up here real quick and telling us? Yeah, that would be great. As we're watching footage, go ahead and hit the next button. We'll go through it. This is Pam Johnson.
I want to thank you all for coming. It's really thrilling to me to see so many that come out to love the ship as much as me and my family's here today. My daughter is here, and she was 5 years old when the ship sank. And my brother, Randall Williamson, he was raised by my father. And he had the, I don't know if you would like to speak about it. If not, I will. Some really cool things happened when my brother was in the Air Force. He was in the Air Force from 1965 to 1970, or 69. And that was during the Vietnam War. And you know, back then they didn't have what we have today, where all the media comes out and watches a war go on. Well, my dad had actually sailed to Vietnam, and he met up with my brother, and I believe it was twice that happened. And I just think that is the coolest thing, that during wartime they would allow a civilian meet up with a serviceman that was in the Air Force. And so I was very proud of my brother being in the Air Force. That was the coolest thing, that my big brother was in the Air Force, and he got to see our dad for a short period of time. And then also my brother had the opportunity to go with my dad for a week on a ship, and I don't know which one it was. For a week he spent with my dad while my dad did the cooking, and I'm sure my brother did all the eating to test to make sure it was good enough for the crew. This year I decided I wanted my daughter to be here really bad because she was 5 when it happened, and she can remember him a little bit. When I asked her just the other day, what are your memories of your grandpa? And she said she can remember him being wearing white and that he was far away on a ship. Not gonna show it?
Oh yeah, we'll do that in a little
Okay. And then my son, who was 4 at the time, he can remember also the pictures of my dad being on a ship. And my son Alan said he was very scared that he would fall into between the dock and the boat. There's my dad. Oh. Thank you. I love him so much, and I miss him terribly, and I feel like he's here with me now, holding me up, so I'm able to tell you a little bit about my life as a daughter of a cook and a sailor on the Great Lakes. My brother and I traveled a lot to take my dad or pick him up from different ports, and when I got 16, I got my driver's license. Then Randall was gone, and so it became my job to take him everywhere. So I got to go to a lot of places to either drop him off or pick him up, or we would go to Toledo ports, and sometimes we'd have to go around through the docks because of trains, you know, sort of like you guys had tonight. So we would spend a lot of times waiting for trains to go by so that we could get to see my dad for 5, 10, 20 minutes or an hour while the ship was either being unloaded or loaded. While I was on the ship with my dad, he fed us all, and obviously it's worked. And I, as my own self, I cooked 12 years in a school. I was a baker, and I was 12 years at a nursing home, and I was a cook in that situation too. But my greatest love was like my dad. I love baking, and my dad was really good at baking bread and pastries and stuff. And during the wintertime when the ships weren't sailing, he would take baking classes, and then he would bring home his homework, and so we all got to eat his French pastries and his little custards and everything. So we had an opportunity to eat his homework. This here is a cookbook that I happened to find, and I'm not sure where. I think when our mother passed away, I think we divided stuff up and things that were kind of like important to me in my life. I think Randall had given to me, and this is a cookbook that was dated January 15th, 1942. And it's odd because I was born January 15th, 1952. But some of the things that are in there, it's kind of odd. It'll say at the beginning, now we must start refrigerating our foods as the sailors are getting sick. So back in 1942, they didn't have the concept of HACCP principles or good food techniques and everything. So I've read a lot in this book, and actually I took a chili recipe that was in the book, and I won a chili contest by using my dad's recipe. I think they felt more sorry for me because I put my dad's picture next to the cookbook, so who else could they vote for but me? This is a Gordon Lightfoot picture a couple years ago. I had the opportunity in Topeka, Kansas. I live in Kansas now. I took my three of my grandchildren. I have 18 of them. These 3 belong to my youngest son, Jeremiah, and that's Cynthia, Isaac, and Isaiah. And they were really excited to be able to go. And every concert we've ever gone to, we've been able to get in free and get backstage passes. And so it's been an honor to meet him 3 times. A couple years ago, I took Lori and my son Alan, and we went to go see him in Winston-Salem. And he remembered me, And my son plays the guitar, so they talk guitar business. And we were really honored to be there and be allowed to go backstage. This is up at Whitefish Bay. This was like the first time I went, I've only gone twice, I can't remember which time it was, but I felt compelled to blow my dad a kiss that evening. And I said, "This is for you, Dad." And of course I was pretty emotional at that time because this was new to me. I didn't attend services until Gordon Lightfoot in 2000 said to me, "Why aren't you going? Why aren't you speaking for your dad? You're his voice now." And I thought, well, nobody would believe me, or they think that I'm blowing it out of proportion, or that it isn't as big a deal as obviously all you think it is, as I do. So I went ahead and went, and that's when I don't know if I have a picture over there. It's my son Jeremiah and Gordon Lightfoot and myself. And that's when he talked to me a little bit, and he had the opportunity to pull me aside and said, "What do you think about me mentioning your dad in the song?" And that, oh, the tears just came. I was so proud that he would mention my father as well as a captain of all things. That was the sweetest thing I felt that a songwriter and a singer could do for our family and the rest of the crew. So when I talk, sometimes I like to say that I'm not grieving my father anymore, that I'm celebrating his life. And that gives a chance to be with my family today. My sister-in-law's here, and my brother drove up from Toledo. My daughter came all the way from Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm from Kansas, so we've traveled quite a ways, a few miles between us all, to come to do this speaking this evening. The one in the middle here, he's got the checkers on. I forgot his letter, but he wrote a letter to my dad last year, dated November 23rd, and he said, Dear Papa Rafferty, my name is Isaiah, and I just want you to know how much I love you, and I know about you because my grandma Pam tells me about what happened to you on the ship. And even though I know you're in heaven, I hope that you'll get this letter and this message on November 10th, 2012. I don't have it with me, but that's the essence of the message. And he says, even though I know you're in heaven, I know you'll get this message. So Dad, I'm sorry that you died, but I'm glad that we have a chance to celebrate your life now. And this is supposed to be a good time and not to be so much of a sad time for us all. Do you have anything else, Michelle? Right after I found out that the ship had sank, actually I found out on a Tuesday, the ship sank on Monday night. I was down in Fort Benning, Georgia, and I was 8 months pregnant with my 4th child, and my daughter Lori, she was 5 years old. So I had a 5-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 2.5-year-old, and one growing in the oven. And I decided maybe I should just stay in Georgia because I'm getting ready to have a baby, and maybe that would just be best for my emotional health, which is what I did. But my my husband was in the Army, and he was on leave for like 47 days. I'm pregnant, I've got 3 kids, I'm going crazy. So I went next door to my neighbors just kind of to get away for a little bit, and he come knocking on the door and said, you need to come home. And I said, what do you want? And he said, no, you need to come home. And I said, what do you want to do? You want to go to the movies? And I'm digging through the newspaper, and that article was there. And my mom had just called and told my husband Bill, please get Pam and tell her to call home. So it's funny how when you have things happen to you, how you change a little bit. And I reverted back to 5 years old, and I said, is my daddy dead? I would have never said that, but I guess my emotion took over, and I just couldn't believe that when my husband said, well, your dad was on a ship. And that's all I had to say. So I called home and talked to my brother and my mom, and it was confirmed at that point. So I really found out about it on November 11th. So November 10th, we were in Georgia having a great time waiting for a baby to show up. And then this tragedy happened. My baby was born 36 days after the sinking. And for some reason, my son Jeremiah loves green and everything about green. And I'm thinking, isn't that odd? My dad loved lime pop and green. So I think they spend a little time in heaven together. And then when Jeremiah was born, everything was green. I just never could understand that. And then it kind of come to me, well, maybe they had a conversation, you know, in God's presence. This is right after I came up to Michigan, and we had done a birthday service for the 50th anniversary of the launching of the Edmund Fitzgerald. So we had shipbuilders, we had book authors. Unfortunately, I was the only family member that attended. We're just like any other family. We fight and argue. We have our opinions, and my opinion sticks with Roscoe. Others go up to Whitefish Bay, some go to Duluth, but I choose to come here. It's actually closer, and I have such a family here. And I know Tim is going to speak a little bit, but I just want to tell you a little bit about Tim McCall. I met him in the year 2000. I think he was 14 and in the 8th grade. And he had a website, and it was called SSEFO. It was Steamship Edmund Fitzgerald Online. So I clicked on, and here I'm talking to a 14-year-old young man who was smarter 20 times than I was. He knew so much about the ship. I was just amazed at what he taught me as a 14-year-old and in the 8th grade, that he started a website, and then we connected with each other all the time. And then we had the opportunity to meet at Mariners Church one time, and he's in the audience tonight. It just thrills my heart that somebody I've known all these years has come to a service for the second time, so I'm honored that he and his family are here. This is a picture of me ringing the bell in Whitefish Bay, that when the services are held, they're having one tonight also, that bell comes out of the case and it sets to the side, and then they have special bell ringers that we can pick. And this year I picked Sean Lay, who was part of the Shipwreck Museum. So tonight he's ringing the bell for Robert C. Rafferty, the steward, and I'm really proud about that. And oh, there I am.
Dan, could you bring your daughter up real quick? Is your brother here?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe bring both of us up. Rick. Could you present his class reading?
This is my firstborn, Lori, and she was 5 when the ship sank, and she remembers him. This is my sister-in-law, Carla, which I love so dearly. And this is my brother, Randall. And we've become a very, very close family. And this tonight, I'm so proud because Randall came and Carla came and Lori to help me celebrate the life of my father. And instead of it being a sad event, I want it to be with love and understanding and not so much emotion, but for us to laugh a little bit and remember the good things about the sailors and the crew that was on that ship. I did have an opportunity to meet the cook that was on the Edmund Fitzgerald that had been on there for 10 years. We met in 2005, and you know, sailors were sometimes little salty characters, their language and their actions. And Red Bergner's son gave me a chair off of the Edmund Fitzgerald, and I said, "Where'd you get that?" And he goes, "Oh, my dad got 3 of them." "Well, where did he get them from?" "Well, you know." I said, "Oh, sort of like my dad used to bring home porterhouse steaks in his suitcase." You know, it's just something that happens, I guess, and I'm telling on him. I hope he's enjoying this. But I feel so honored and proud for all of you coming, but especially my family, so they can see what I've been doing since the year 2000. And it really means a lot.
We'd like to present this to the family, and especially to you. It's a plaque. It says, "No farewell words were spoken, no time to say goodbye. You were gone before we knew it, and only God knows why." Please.
Yeah.
Thank you for letting me share a few minutes about my father. Thank you.
Great, you
All right.
Nope, we're good. This is the Mighty Fitz going through the Sioux Locks, the big squeeze, if you will, loaded with 30,000 tons of iron ore, setting all kinds of cargo records. So right away, she started breaking records, and then, quite frankly, breaking her own records as they loaded the ship bigger and bigger. and that would hold for quite some time. She didn't stay as the longest ship for the longest time, but Carl Bradley actually had that record for many years. And then the Paul Tregurtha, our 1,000-footer that's out there now, is now the Queen of the Lakes for the longest time. So Fitz had that title for a while and had some records for a while. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. Did we have any other connections to the crew of the Edmund Fitzgerald here? Any other family members that were here? We're going to talk to a crew member real quick. Captain, are you here? Captain Morrigal, where are you at? Do you have 2 seconds to chat with us, Skipper? One of the third mates, he was a relief skipper on board and filled in for a crew member who was on vacation, and he actually got to take this same trip. And I'd like to introduce to you, he became a tug captain after he was third mate, Captain Dick Morrigal.
I was on the Fitzgerald a very short time, but it was in October, November, the storm period. So this led to me being subpoenaed by the Coast Guard because they wanted to know more about how the ship reacted in the heavy weather. I was a third mate there. A mate is there's 3 mates on the ship. They're deck officers. They assist the captain, first, second, and third mate. I was only there on a relief basis, so I was third mate. And we went through nothing bad, a couple of gales, nothing out of the ordinary. And I thought it was the greatest job to have. I had my own room, and most of my time was spent on tugboats, seagoing tugboats. So when you get on a ship like the Edmund Fitzgerald, that's like being in a palace compared to a tugboat. The reason I went to tugboats was because it's just a hard way to go, and for every day you work, you get a day off. So I was home half of the time with the family, whereas if on ships you had to stay months at a time. I was there I did this for 48 years, about 24 years on saltwater, and another other 24 years on the Great Lakes, and the connecting seaway. I had pilot's license for those waters, and most of my time I was a captain. And a captain of a tugboat is familiar with people getting in trouble, disasters, or anything. The first thing they do when ship gets in trouble is they want to call a tugboat. But the crew on the Fitzgerald was pretty consistent. I was on her, I think, 2 or 3 years before she sunk, and it was just about the same people on her. I knew probably half of them. I was acquainted with Captain McSorley. We were just acquaintances. And then the chief engineer was more than an acquaintance. He was a friend of mine. When I heard about this, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe a ship like that, that could happen to a ship like that. I was down in the lower St. Lawrence River down on Quebec when I got that message. I was on a seagoing tug, and it was just unbelievable that a ship like that could break up and sink like she did. I knew Bob Rafferty. Him and I were shipmates on a tanker years before the Fitz, and what I remember about him most was he was a baker, and he used to put out a lot of little goodies for the night crew, you know. But he was from Toledo, out in Toledo, and I remember him very well. His daughter looks just like him. The first time I saw her, 4 or 5 years ago, I think it was, maybe longer, was at that museum in Detroit where I think Roscoe was there. He said they're going to have some of the survivors of the Fitz there. And there was a group of ladies around the table. And the minute I saw her, I said to her, "I know who you are." She looked just like her father. The whole thing was just a terrible. Sailors shouldn't have to live like that, but that's the way it is. But if there's a certain risk to go on to sea, but it shouldn't be excessive. I mean, when a ship is not well built, sailors shouldn't have to put up with that. Well, let me say that I didn't come here prepared to make a speech, but people always got questions about the Fitzgerald. If we got enough time, if anybody got a question, I could maybe answer if you want to.
Just a little bit time. We're trying to get to the 7:10. You know, with the countdown to 7:10, we just maybe one quick question if somebody has one.
Take the mic up.
Anybody got a question about it?
Tell us about the springing.
Yeah, why don't you tell us about the springing when you talked to Captain McSorley and in 10-foot seas you saw that ship.
Oh.
What was happening when that happened?
I testified at the Board of Inquiry. We were just coming out of Whitefish Point, going out into the lake. We were late going up to get a cargo, and it was a gale, and out of the northwest. So he told me he had been up in the river and taken her through the lock and everything, and he wanted to go down below, go to bed. So we were coming to Whitefish Point, and he said to me, "We're going to take the scenic route." What he meant by that was we was going to go up along the north shore of Lake Superior, get closer to the northern shore there for shelter, and that's what he called the scenic route. And but when we were heading out into the lake, we're still in the bay. When that ship would plow into like a 10-foot sea, that isn't much, you know. And you could see the shock of the impact of the wave on the bow just go right down the deck. Now, of course, these ships bend. They have to do that. If they don't bend, they break. But I never saw anything quite like that. And but when I was on her, I wasn't a greenhorn by any means. I'd been a mate and a captain on tugboats. But the reason I was on the Fitzgerald as a third mate was between jobs. The company I was working for went belly up, and I took relief jobs on these ships. That's how I happened to be on the Fitz. And I remarked to the captain, who I knew before I went there, just an acquaintance, so I said, "She seems to do a lot of bending for the amount of sea we got here." And he said to me, "That's right," he said, "it scares me sometimes." Now this guy was an old-time captain. I mean, I don't want to see anything that scares him, you know. But he never elaborated. I wanted to find out more about what this was about, but then he went down below and told me about changing course or reducing speed or something to make you always want to take as much stress and strain off the ship as you can, I said, "Well, I'm not sure I would know when to do that." He said, "Well, I'm just going to lay down on top of my bed." He said, "Call me." That's the great thing about being a third mate. You call a captain, It's when you're the captain, it's tough to know someone else to call. And then another time, we were loaded coming down, and it was big, and I said to him, just trying to strike up a conversation, but he didn't converse much. He was just one-liners. But I said it must be nice to be on a ship like this after the Carrollton. The Carrollton was a little canaler. That was his first job as a captain. It's only 250 feet long, and they're rough riding, tough little jobs, but that's just what it is. So I said to him, "It must be nice to be on a ship like this after the Carrollton." And he said, "Not as much as you might think." He said, "The Carrollton would beat you up, but she'd bring you in." Then he walked away. I finally concluded that he didn't trust that ship. I reported all of this at the Board of Inquiry. I told him about this. And then one more little thing I put.
Real quick, Cap.
I talked about when I was describing this to the Board of Inquiry, this admiral kept asking me these questions. I wasn't prepared for this when I went there. He kept asking me all these questions about this bending and flexing and all that. For the lack of a better explanation, I said, well, it was like a diving board after somebody jumped off in its vibration. 10 years later, I picked up a report by the Coast Guard, and of course, they used better words than I did. Springing and vibratory stresses. That admiral was very, very interested in that, and he kept pursuing it. I've been on that witness stand like 3 hours, so we found out that what I saw there, that short time that I was there as third mate, we got a lot of knowledge out of that. It took years for it to come to the surface, but we did. And McSorley didn't trust the ship, and nobody could believe that either. But that's the way it was, and we really did see it. And we saw a potential problem there. I never give it another thought, but until after she sunk, then I thought. But anyway, that's what McSorley was aware that he had a problem there. No question about it.
Thank you, Cap. Thank you very much. I could listen to this captain talk all night, quite honestly. When we talk about the scenic route, leaving out of Superior, Wisconsin, all the way up, he had a choice to make at Isle Royale. They knew the storm was coming. Captain McSorley knew his weather, like all good captains do. They had a choice. They could stay here, wait out the storm, as several ships did. They opted to take the northern route. That's because the waves blowing from the northwest at 60 miles an hour would build this entire expanse of Lake Superior. So farther the fetch, the lot bigger the waves get. This is the worst place that they'd want to be on the Great Lakes. But Cooper of the Anderson, McSorley, as they came up here, made a call. Do they go for it? And they mistimed the storm. The storm came through Marquette faster than they expected. And by the time they came down past Caribou, past Mishpicotton, they got hit in what was the worst part of the storm. There was no escaping at that point, and the ship obviously ripped in part and went down. Can we go to the next level? Zug Island, the final, Gordon Lightfoot said fully loaded for Cleveland. It was bound for here. A couple things he got wrong. This is where they launched from in Superior. These are the ore docks. You've probably seen these if you've been to any of the port cities like Marquette. This is how they load with the big train cars, and it's gravity fed into the ship. Go ahead and go to the next one. This is the storm coming in. It's kind of hard to see on this one, so I won't go too much into depth. Go to the next one. Another zoom in as the low pressure system went past Lance and came in, and as these isobar measurements got closer together, heavier winds, 60-mile-an-hour winds that came in, which happen almost every year on the Great Lakes, quite honestly. On Lake Superior, we see that at Standard Rock every season. So was it out of the ordinary? Not really. I see a lot of the talk about the storm. It certainly was a big storm, but compared to the great storms we've seen, it wasn't that incredible of a storm. Here's the area where they came through. A lot of the people have talked about Chummy Bank or the 6 Fathom Shoal. The Coast Guard investigator I talked to said this is just a misprint, that this is it's supposed to be 16 instead of 6, and that the Canadian survey ship, the Bayfield, went out there, searched that area. I talked to members of that crew, and they found nothing. Now, there's been a lot of talk about how this ship ran aground, and Roscoe and I will argue and argue until the cows come home about whether or not that ship came close enough to here. But it suffices to say that none of the Coast Guard investigators believe that it came anywhere close to this shoal. And because I dove the Fitzgerald and saw the entire upside down stern section, 250 feet of stern section, I went over the entire top. There's not a scratch on it. So to think that it hit on the bow and somehow didn't damage the stern, I don't buy it. I don't buy it. There's no evidence other than Cooper, as he looked at the radar, as they went through this area, said, that ship is in closer than I'd like to be. And that's where all of this came up. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that came up. Let's go ahead and why this theory was so popular. Here's the ship. They did talk, as they went through around 3 o'clock, McSorley said there was some damage on the freighter, that the rail was down. We don't know what rail it was. I've seen it written port. I don't know where people get that. I've never seen that there was actually a report of which one it was. And he said he had a vent missing. These white tops here are the vents that equalize the pressure within the ballast. if one of those gets ripped open, water will come in, but everybody argues, would that be enough water to flood? Would it be enough to sink it? The Coast Guard eventually would say it was actually the hatch clamps on each one of these hatches. There's 22 of these hatch clamps. And when they took off on Sunday, it was common practice, because it was a weekend and it was union work, it was expensive, that they would just dog the corners, and it was a beautiful, sunny day. So they dog these corners. There's 96 clamps on each one of these hatches. So there's 2,112 of those hatch clamps on here. And people argue with me again, Rick, there's no way the crew went out there with these hatch clamps not all dogged down. But the truth is, when you look at the shipwreck, there's clamps that look like this, like C-clamps, and there's clamps that are stretched out like this. The ones that are stretched out are where the hatch blew off. The ones that still stay intact are the ones that weren't dogged down. And to this day, I go to the Sulaks, I look at freighters going through, and they're still not dogging all. I have pictures of it. People still don't dog all the hatches. Now again, is that why it sank? Probably not. But there's been a lot of talk with Gordon Lightfoot changing the song about putting blame on because he didn't like the fact that they said, well, they weren't dogged. Well, the truth is, there's no blame, but they weren't dogged, I'm telling you. Go ahead. Here's the Arthur M. Anderson behind the Edmund Fitzgerald. Once they reported their problems, they also said we have radar out. And they were worried because there were several saltwater vessels that were at Whitefish Point, and they were worried that they were going to head out into the storm, and the Fitz had two radars on there. Both were out. They couldn't see anything into the storm. So the Fitz called the Anderson and said, would you please look at your scope? I'll close the distance. You tell me what's happening with those other ships. And they said, it's not a problem, don't worry about it. In fact, was Cooper on board the Anderson worried about it? Not really. He actually went and took a nap. So when people tell me it must have been very harrowing for the Anderson, it was scary because they took a wave that came up and hit their lifeboat 35 feet above the water, and it damaged it. So we're talking about a massive wave, and the timing of that wave goes to about 7:10 when the Fitz went down. So significant. But Cooper was not in the pilot house when that last radio transmission came in, and basically the first mate asked him, how are you doing with your problems? And the Fitz said, we're holding our own. Here's the final route. As the two ships closed down, the Fitzgerald slowed down. It was a faster ship. Anderson was closing on the position, but still didn't come within 10 miles, more than 10 miles away. And they saw a snow squall come up, and they watched this blob on the radar. And all of a sudden, when the blob came back and they had visibility, the Fitz was gone. And so instantly they start calling, can we get somebody to help us? They are calling the Coast Guard. The closest is a Sioux, which is where they had one little tugboat sitting there called the Naugatuck. And the Naugatuck was their only option because the other ships were all down. Go ahead. Last call indicated that it could survive. That was the holding our own. Let's go and hit radio. Can you bring the audio level up? We'll show you the last radio transmissions, or actually when they're looking for the ship, because they have to convince the Anderson to come back. Can you get it okay? Or? Yep.
Is it right here? Ready to play?
Yeah. Suffered an oil line failure and was unable to leave until that next morning. The Coast Guard made a desperate plea to the Anderson to turn around and go back into the storm.
We thought there's any possibility that you could come out and go back there and do any searching? Yeah, I don't know. The team out there is tremendously large, and if you want me to, I can, but I'm not going to be making any time. I'll be lucky to make 2 or 3 miles an hour going right back out that way.
Can you imagine that? He goes through the storm, he sees this massive freighter vanish, essentially within minutes, and now the Coast Guard saying, turn around, would you please go out there? But quite honestly, that's the brotherhood of the sea. That's what these sailors do. And he made that call, flipped the ship around, but because the ship was going against the wind now, it was literally going against these 60-mile-an-hour winds. It took them until 2 a.m. to get out there. Now, Coast Guard had an airplane that came out and made it by 10 a.m., but that's 3 hours since the Fitz went down. So there was just no possibility, even if they had survival suits, it just didn't happen that anybody could be picked up. And again, we talked earlier about how this is significant. 1966, we had a survivor and we found most of the crew. 1958, we found 2 guys that survived overnight in a November storm. How is it that this ship vanished with 29 lives and we didn't find a single crewman. Just some life jackets, a spray bottle, some life rings, 2 life boats that were badly damaged, and that was it. And as these crew came through, the poor Coast Guard, the cutter Woodrush had to come all the way across Lake Superior, 24 hours through that storm, where the waves were washing over the ship with green water, and Captain Hobaugh brought it in, but there was nothing they could do. There was nothing left. And they finally saw a little bit of an oil slick. A plane flew over and located where with a submarine finding magnetometer. They found 2 pieces on the bottom and said that could possibly be the Edmund Fitzgerald. And they came out, did a side scan, and sure enough, the pieces matched up, but they had no idea what they looked like on the bottom. So in 1976, the Coast Guard came out and brought an underwater robot down called the Curve. Go ahead and hit your next button. And can we skip it or no? Just leave the volume down. This is Captain Hobaugh. He's talking about the storm, and I'll just kind of talk you through what he talks about, how these incredible waves that are hitting him. Now, he'd been on the ocean before, and he was talking about how the succession of waves would hit him from every angle. And most of the time, you would pitch or you would yaw in a storm on the ocean. At the Great Lakes, it was bouncing off the shore and hitting his ship in every direction. It was crazy. There was nothing they could do. And we've heard that so many times from different ships that have gone through these storms. In fact, in the 1913 storm, 1940 storm, the rudders on many of the freighters were actually either torn completely off or dislodged to where they couldn't steer. And once they turned sideways, they would roll over. Now, the Fitzgerald, there's no evidence to see that it went down any certain way. We do know that the bow section plowed in. We know that the stern section flipped over, and there's been a lot of talk about how it went down in one piece. And Pam, forgive me, as I talk about these things, I realize that it is of interest, but this is a grave site for people, and there's nobody, we took a lot of hard knocks when we dove it because we found one of the missing crew. And I'll be honest with you, there's nothing more reverent than a shipwreck for me, because this is the connection that we have to go down there and actually do some kind of an investigation. So I'm thinking of Robert as I talk about this, but I also have to be matter of fact in the fact that there's so many clues. Degree angle, and the sides of the ship split away. It was so fast, thank God, that those crew had nothing, they had no way to get in touch. It was over in a second. And I think if there's any solace to think about that especially for those guys in the stern section, the cooks, the engineers, it flipped over and it was done. And it's tragic to even think about what they went through, but today we remember these incredible people and what that might have happened. How are we doing on time?
Can I go to 7 o'clock?
Let's do it.
Okay, I need your mic.
Okay.
You take the other one?
Yep. In 1980, in 1976, the Coast Guard went there. In 1980, Jacques Cousteau went down there to do a survey, and he actually came to a picture in Detroit and with Coleman Young, and then took off. He never went on the expedition. His son Jean-Michel was the one who led the expedition. They took the Soucoupe down and investigated. They were the first human eyes to see the shipwreck. They filmed it and they put it into their documentary. The Cousteau Society did one called Stairway to the Sea about the St. Lawrence Seaway. It was an incredible documentary, but only a half hour on the shipwreck. So we didn't get much other than the fact that he thought that it broke apart on the surface. The next investigation was 1989. Whitefish Point came down, and they brought a 3D camera down there, high tech, surveyed the wreck in 3D, and you had to wear glasses to watch the footage to see what happened. It was then that we saw that the port side pilot house door was open. And there was a lot of conjecture on, did somebody try to get out of the ship? What might have happened? Or was it simply open because that would have been the lee side, away from the storm, that somebody would go outside to try to look through the glass. If the snow was blinding them, they could actually see it. So in 1994, another expedition came in. It was Harbor Branch Oceanographic came with Whitefish Point with the Clelia, and they dove down, and then only 2 weeks later, a businessman from Mount Morris took all of his money, put it together, and rented a submarine, the Delta, and took me with him and dove down. And Fred is on the phone right now. Sadly, his wife isn't feeling very well right now, and our prayers are with her. But we'd like to talk to Fred about that incredible investigation and how he risked everything to literally tell the story of the Edmund Fitzgerald.
Okay, go ahead, Fred.
Yes, nice to be with you tonight, and I want to send my greetings to Pam Johnson. Miss Pam makes that pilgrimage every year to be with the people at River Rouge, so hello to Pam.
Hi.
Go ahead, Fred. Fred, tell us something about your experience.
One of our expedition moved in the summer of 1994. We made 7 dives to Fitzgerald in Lake Superior, and I imagine Rick has filled in the crowd there with the information on the Fitzgerald, the background, the history, and what the wreck site might look like.
Yes.
What was his favorite, most interesting thing that he found?
Rick wanted to know, what was your most favorite, interesting part of diving the ship?
Well, I think it's all interesting. The Fitzgerald, of course, is scattered over several acres, and so when you're looking at the wreck itself, and you're so close to the legend, it's kind of awe-striking and very memorable.
We've got a picture of Pam Johnson's, your drawing you gave to Pam about how the ship sets. Maybe you could explain what they're looking at.
Well, the site map was done after the expedition based on the documentation that we acquired, and it was done by an engineering firm, and it shows both parts of the wreck and area in between, and it shows some taconite. You might see some piles there, and some pieces, the parts of the Fitzgerald lying in between the two, the main sections.
You see that right there. Cool, thank you.
Okay.
That's what was the most significant part about our...
What was the most significant part of the dive?
Well, I think that all of it was significant in the fact that we felt that we were in uncharted territory, looking at areas that had never been explored before, and coming back with new information that gave us a better picture of the wreck area.
Thanks for calling. We'll go ahead and take it.
Okay, Fred, we appreciate that. We're going to appreciate your...
Again, we hate to truncate these incredible eyewitnesses that have seen things, but the truth is we're coming up on that date, that time of 7/10 when the Fitzgerald said they were holding their own and vanished. And we would like to have, is the pastor here? Is it Charles? Yeah. Yes, please come up here. And if maybe we could maybe just a few words or a quick prayer, and then we'll start the bell ringing.
Good evening, everyone. It's good for me to be here tonight again with you. The Lord has given us a much better night tonight than we had a year ago. But we are here tonight to honor these men And it's just a privilege for me. I was just a young man at the time living in Southwest Detroit when the news of the Edmund Fitzgerald came, and it had a significant impact on my life at that time. So let's bow our heads together and we'll call upon the name of the Lord. Heavenly Father, we pause at this moment to recognize you as creator of the universe, the one who made the oceans and the seas. And Lord, we as human beings don't always understand why things happen and why they happen at the times that they happen. But you have everything in control, and you know everything, and you have a plan for everything that happens. So tonight as we gather and we pay tribute and honor to these 29 souls, Lord, I pray that your blessings will be upon their families. I pray that the comfort and the grace and the mercy of God would just surround their lives. We look forward to the day when one day you'll call and the sea and the oceans will give up their dead. And these men will once again stand with us in eternal glory with you. Thank you in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Rick, when I get to the bell at 7:45. 7:45.
Yeah.
Would you mind saying something real quick about Don Erickson? Did you know Don?
No, I didn't.
Oh, you didn't? Okay.
Introduce him, maybe say a prayer.
Oh, just, if we could real quick, Don Erickson was the captain on the William Clay Ford, and such an integral part as we talk about this incredible turnaround. The Cooper turned around the Anderson, and the William Clay Ford also turned around and came up. We're honored in the fact that the William Clay Ford lives on with the pilot house at the Dawson Museum, but sadly we lost the skipper this year. And if we could, maybe just a quick prayer for Captain Erickson, who was so instrumental in this rescue effort that, of course, never brought anything through, but this man became such an important part about the Edmund Fitzgerald. So maybe bow our heads real quick for Captain Erickson as well.
Let's just have a moment of silence for him, and then we'll honor him with a prayer. Our Father, once again we come to you. And Lord, we pay tribute and honor to this Captain Erickson. Father, how we thank you for brave and learned men and these souls that go across the seas and pilot these huge ships. And Lord, it just helps us to understand that you are in control of everything, and you have given us wisdom, and you've guided these men like Captain Erickson. And we ask you tonight, Lord, that you would bless his family. We pray, Father, that his memory will always stand out, and that we will, everyone, generations after all of us here tonight are gone, we will still know and understand and pay tribute to these wonderful men. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Can we get our guests into the website?
Who is it? Our guest from the website. Come on up. Absolutely.
You gotta go over there and get them programmed. You bet. We're gonna.
Is the PowerPoint?
Yeah, he's gonna do it right now. You might have to move your mic up a little bit.
Yeah. Well, we'll try this. Okay, so if any of you have ever Googled the Edmund Fitzgerald, you might be familiar with my writing, but I'm actually probably not familiar unless you've actually gone through every single page of the website. And I do that on purpose. I don't want the website to be about me. I want it to be about the 29 men. So I'm going to go ahead and... Can you hear me here? Okay, good. I'm going to go ahead and just... when Roscoe first asked me to come and speak about how I got involved in this entire story, my initial thoughts were, well, I don't know if I should go and I should talk about myself for 10 minutes. So I thought about it for a little bit, and that's when I realized that I was probably going to get to see Pam Johnson again, who I've become very close with over the course of the website. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about where I came from. If we can get the PowerPoint working, fine. If we can't, that's fine. But I went to high school at Arsenal Technical High School in Indianapolis, Indiana. That's where I'm from. Both of my parents are here with me tonight. And then I later went to Indiana University for my undergraduate degree, where I got a degree in psychology. So I'm not involved in history. I don't have family members that were on the ship. And now I'm at Purdue University, where I'm getting my doctorate in social psychology. So that's kind of where I came from. The question is, what caused me to actually make this website to remember the men on the ship? Well, this actually started in the 8th grade when I was 14, like Pam told you earlier. Okay, we can go to the next slide, if you can. Yeah, go ahead, go through all that. Keep going. Okay. Yeah, and you can go to the next one.
Bring your mic up closer to you.
Okay. So I'll tell you a little bit about, just a little bit of history about the ship that Rick may have touched on, and then we'll talk about the 8th grade and how this all started. So the reason that we're here today in Rouge, Michigan, this was one of the places where the Edmund Fitzgerald kind of first started. And just to give you an idea of the size, we talked about that a little bit ago. The Edmund Fitzgerald is such a big story because it was also such a big ship. At 729 feet, for those of you who are from Detroit or familiar with the Detroit skyline, Renaissance Center is 727 feet is where the roof is. So if you sat the Edmund Fitzgerald on its side, it would actually be taller than the Renaissance Center tower. So this was a huge ship. And it was the largest ship on the Great Lakes for about 13 years. Broke a lot of records for heaviest cargo loads. And then the final voyage, which we've talked a little bit about already, ended on November 10th, 1975, about 17 miles northwest of Whitefish Point. So the present, SS Edmund Fitzgerald Online, this is how it actually started. In the 8th grade, we were asked to do a project. It was called What a Disaster. And everyone in the 8th grade, I think there were about 200 of us at the school, had to break up and we had to report on different disasters in history. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. And one of the teachers, Linda Gaggy, approached me and she said, the best project last year was on the Edmund Fitzgerald. And as a 14-year-old from Indianapolis, I didn't know much about the story, so my response was, who is that? And she said, do some research and find out. So that's exactly what I did. And I became really interested in the shipwreck. And I decided this was what I wanted to do my project on. It was such a mystery, nobody knew why it had happened. So I started to do my project on that. You can go to the next one. And it started out as the school project. I reported on it, and somewhere along the lines, I decided I knew nothing about websites. I was new to computers even, but I thought, wouldn't it be neat if I had a place to gather all of the research that I've done, and I can share it later on with people, whether it be my family or friends. So I thought, I'm gonna make a website. I knew nothing about it. I did not know how I was gonna do it. Go to the next slide. But that's exactly what I did. So I did the project, I reported on it to all of my classmates and to the teachers in the 8th grade. I got an A on the project, by the way. But then after that, I kept the website on the internet. And it was that year, it was in the year 2000, I believe it was April 25th that I first put the website online. And a few months later, Pam Johnson actually contacted me. And I was really naive. I was 14 years old. I didn't exactly know what I was getting myself into originally. And it was when Pam Johnson first contacted me that I really started putting names and faces to this shipwreck, rather than this was a big ship that had sank in 1975. So this was when it first became kind of a big deal. And that's when I started realizing that I wanted this to not be a website about a ship. I wanted this to be a website about the men. So kind of the entire concept of dedicated to informing others, that's what my website has always said. That's where I really put that into action. And my new goal with this website was to tell other people about the story that didn't know about it. When I first heard about the Edmund Fitzgerald, I thought it was a person. I didn't think it was a ship. I didn't think it was connected to crewmen. And I realized there were more people out there that were just like me, that didn't know this story, and they didn't have the faces that went along with the shipwreck. The sources that were on the internet didn't really talk about the men that were on the ship. It talked about this disaster that happened. It talked about how impressive the ship was. So the new goal of my website was to put those faces with this disaster. And that's kind of the entire goal behind it, is above all, I want everyone to remember Fitzgerald's victims. And these are the men that we're actually here for tonight. So one thing that I want to continue doing, and I have done over the years, when I first made this website, it was the year of the 25th anniversary. I was 14 years old. Like I've said this multiple times, I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. And news organizations started contacting me when it was time for the 25th anniversary. They said, "You've got this website, we want to interview you." And I was 14, this was scary and exciting all at the same time. But my response to my parents was, I don't think I should do this. I don't want to become known because of this shipwreck. These were people who died. And my parents kind of reminded me, they said, your goal with this website was to tell other people the story, so you should go ahead and do this. And this is how I first started reaching out to the public, and I was able to tell the story of these men. And being connected to Pam Johnson, I also got to know other family members. And this was when I was able to start making crew profiles and actually putting biographies of some of the crew members up, interviewing the families so that people outside of this story, much like I used to be, could actually connect and they could realize that this was more than 29 men. This affected lots of families. They were brothers, they were sons, they were fathers. So ever since, kind of over the last 12 years or so, I've been telling this story to anyone who would listen and anyone who didn't know about it. I've been able to do interviews where I taught other people about it. I've also been able to teach middle school students about it, people who have found the website. And Roscoe was actually just talking to my parents and I at the beginning of this, and he told me he first became interested in this story through my website. So that's kind of, the more people that I can tell and the more people that I can get interested in, I think the longer that the memory of these men is going to live on. So that's kind of my whole purpose with it. Go to that slide. I just wanted to thank everybody for listening to me today, and I don't think there should be any questions because he's been going over the history really well, but thanks for letting me speak.
Don't go too far, because you know the crew. And let me tell you the truth about when you're a documentary producer and you start calling family members and try to get things. Being a 14-year-old was the best thing that could possibly happen, because not one family member would look and say, "What are you doing this for? Why are you doing this?" They knew that this young man was doing it from his heart. They didn't have to question it. So when you think about a 14-year-old with that kind of gumption to be able to say, I'm going to build this tribute, and it's not just going to be a rehash of all the stuff that we hear about. Did it run aground? Did it have a structural failure? Was it a big wave? All the different stuff that so many of us have heard again and again. But he came up and actually did the crew. And I think when we ring the names, would you read the names for us? Because you have that connection with the crew, and I think that that would be an amazing tribute to each one of those 29 people that he remembers on this site. And quite honestly, that family members I know have shared so much with you too. So I would be very moved. I think the audience would too because of that. Let's bring up the mayor real quick. Mr. Mayor, you've been waiting so patiently. Where is he at? And at the museum, a representative from the museum as well. Are they here, or are they stuck by that train?
I guess the train answered that.
It might be. Have you heard the low drone of the ships as they go by, and they do that long tone, and then they do the blah, blah after? We've heard it a couple of times here. That's a salute from the freighters as they come by. A salute to the crew, a salute to this memorial that we're putting on today. It's also a salute that the ships do as they pass each other in the night as well. What do you say, Roscoe? Do we have them here?
I see the museum. Okay.
All right. Come on up here. You know, we look at each one of the different communities that have been affected by this ship. Whitefish Point is certainly the most famous of all of the museums because that's where the wreck site is, 17 miles away. And it's a very important focal point. But when we look at the building of the Fitzgerald and the men behind it, there's no greater place than River Rouge to be able to have a tribute, if you will. So what I would like to do is have this proclamation read. Who do we have here?
My name is Karen Ward. I'm representing the mayor and council.
Mayor Pro Tem.
I'm the mayor pro tem.
Oh, fantastic. Do you mind reading the proclamation for us? You want to read it here? You want to read it here?
Here, I'll read it.
Okay.
I want to thank everybody for coming tonight and remembering, and remembering these 29 wonderful men that lost their lives on November 10th, 1975. And the city and Freddie Kearns and Gail Schultz have put a ton of work into this to make sure everybody's remembered. We have a proclamation here making 2012, November 10th, we're dedicating this date as the Edmund Fitzgerald Day. And I'd like to present this to Dolores Sweckel. Yes, and this is to go into the museum in honor of these men. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on, for your patience, and work on those trains for us next time, please. No, it's the business, you know, I mean, this is what keeps this area running, and we see this raw steel. You saw a picture of the taconite pellets that were on the Edmund Fitzgerald. These purple marbles that were the cargo, a low-grade iron ore that's harvested out of the earth in Duluth and Superior, and then shipped down and smelted right here. I mean, they literally throw those little marbles into this giant pot and melt it into steel. It's part of our industry here. It becomes the automobiles that they literally turn into cars right here in Detroit. So the Fitzgerald had a tie to the Detroit area, to Michigan, to literally the Great Lakes, because of that's what it did. So when I see those trains, I think progress. I think that we're working, and thank goodness for that with the economy we've had to have the trains moving. I'm thrilled. So what would you like to do next? Do you want to do some thank yous? Do you want to start to ring the bell? How close are we getting?
We got 10 minutes. Is there any shipyard? He's got a raffle, but do we have a shipyard?
You bet, Jim. He said, hold this. A raffle is coming up next. Oh, good. What do you have, Jim?
Well, let's get someone up here to get the winner of that. Jan, you want to come up here and pull it out?
Right there. Here, you can hold it.
See if you call it off.
Okay. Got it.
Now just get one out of there.
Excellent. Pull two. I'm going to steal one. All right. Here we go. This is the 50-50, Jim?
No, this is a picture of the Edmund Fitzgerald.
Picture of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Pull out your blue tickets, and I will read the number 1, 1, 1, 1, 3, 6. Nice, Tim. Our website designer. This is the 50-50. What? $45 inside here. What? Did you put that ticket back in for me, Michaela? And we will have you pick it out too, and I'll mix them up again so you can't possibly find it. This is an official. My last name's Mixter. You'd think I could do this, right? Mix them up. There you go. All right, pick one out. Do you want to read the number? All right.
2720656.
That's me.
While we're getting pictures, why don't we do a couple of thank yous too? There's so many volunteers that have put this together. We look at people like Commissioner Fred Kearns, Gail Schultz, Tom Abar, forgive me if I pronounce your name, Aber, Roscoe Clark, obviously Greg and Sue Joseph, Jenny Cooper, Jim Holliday, Julie Peterson, Mike Ward, Bill Shaw, Dolores Sweckel, thank you. Help me with these. Janice Chesney, George Chirota.
Yeah.
I knew that. See, good enough. Mike Hilden, Herbert Parson, Chester Weichel, Troy Newman Sr., Jerry Sr., and Jerry Jr. Chaput probably. Yeah. Sarah and Michaela Cagle, David Bauer, Peggy Madden, Howard Schiffman, PC, Rouge Bar and Grill, Troy Newman Jr., Integrated Environmental, Jenny Cooper, Gail Schultz, HNC, Dave Bajorek, Dennis Luke, and how do you pronounce that? Camuse? Let's do it. Camuse Lime Company. Thank you, and thank you to all of you for being out here as well. Something else we have to do, Jim?
Okay. had passed out a bunch of these.
Okay.
With a bell ringing.
Okay.
So if you hold one of them,
We need you up here.
yeah,
Okay.
get in line.
You have a white ticket that was passed out. Jim made sure that we had 29 ringers for the bell. We need you to start lining up. Is there any particular order? It doesn't matter, does it? Fantastic, Jim. All right, let's get our line up.
Along that sidewalk.
Along the side here in front, by the projector?
Sidewalk all the way down.
Oh, okay. Along the side, looking at the pictures of the Fitzgerald. The sidewalk is there. Stand on the sidewalk, please. And Tim. Oh, do you need to ring the bell, or if you need to, we can do it. I can read while you ring, my friend. There you go. You want this one, or which one do you want?
Yeah. I'm gonna move over there.
Do you want me to repeat the position of the chest? Stay a couple, 3 seconds, and then okay.
Ernest M. McSorley, Master.
See some system over there. Make sure you go around this way.
John H. McCarthy, First Mate. James A. Pratt, Second Mate. Michael E. Armagast, Third Mate. George J. Hull, Chief Engineer. Edward F. Benden, First Assistant Engineer. Thomas E. Edwards, Second Assistant Engineer. Russell G. Haskell, Second Assistant Engineer. Oliver J. Champeau, Third Assistant Engineer. Frederick J. Beecher, Porter. Thomas Benson, Oiler. Thomas D. Borgeson, Maintenance Man. Nolan F. Church, Porter. Ransom E. Cundy, Watchman. Bruce L. Hudson, Deckhand. Alan G. Bauman, Second Cook. Gordon F. McClellan, Wiper. Joseph W. Mazes, Special Maintenance Man. Eugene W. O'Brien, Wheelman. Carl A. Peckel, Watchman.
How many more you got? So we need some more bell ringers. Anybody? Come on. You jump in right there.
John J. Poviak, Wheelsman. Robert C. Rafferty, Steward. Paul M. Ripa, deckhand. John D. Simmons, wheelsman. William J. Spengler, watchman. Mark A. Thomas, deckhand. Ralph G. Walton, oiler. David E. Weiss, cadet of the deck. And Blaine H. Wilhelm, oiler.
Tim, before you go too far, why don't you ring that one last time, the 30th ring, as we talked about the 30,000 other sailors who've been lost on the Great Lakes. Let's remember them with these 29. So eerie and chilling as I hear the bagpipes, and I think about these people that we've studied so long, and there's so many loved ones that it's always been very powerful as we look at what Mother Nature can take away so quickly. Here's that lifeboat that was ripped in half. Actually, now inside of the museum itself, at the Valley Camp Museum, a mute testimony on the power of the lakes. Let's go to the next one. Lifeboat number 2. Split right across the front. Literally the seams ripped open from the force of when it went underneath and probably gained buoyancy again as it was dragged down. Again, we don't have anybody to tell us what happened during this incredible sinking action that happened, but it must have just been incredibly quick and very violent. Some of the debris that was found, not much at all, quite honestly, as the ships went through, the Wood Rush went through and found an oil slick, found a couple of life rings, and that was it. And it was the middle of the night, so literally they looked for any clue that they could in the hope that they would find somebody on a raft, but unfortunately it never happened. Here's the man. He read about the story, and we wouldn't have a celebration, I don't think, if it wasn't for Gordon Lightfoot. We wish that every ship would have this kind of a memorial, but the truth is everybody wants to talk about one ship on November 10th. We've talked about so many storms, but I think if there is a tribute, and Pam, I think that we think about these crew members. If you look at what Tim does and these people that have been affected by this, so much more. You couldn't name the captain of the Regina that went down in the 13 storm. You might not be able to name the wheelsman that sunk on any of the other freighters too, but we certainly remember Bob Rafferty. We remember Captain McSorley, and we do because of Gordon Lightfoot, because of that song. And because it just endures. One of the crew members who actually was a first mate on board the Fitzgerald, who later was sail on the Wolverine when I was actually doing a TV story, hated the song at first because there's that darn song. Although in sailor talk they don't say darn very often. But it drove them nuts. And I know for many of the family members too, in the beginning it was that way. And Gordon Lightfoot was very protective about it, until it was bridged at Whitefish Point. I think there was healing on all sides at that point, and now it's endearing. When I see his signature on the paper that you have, and I know that the family members, it means everything to him too. And for a while, Gordon got really sick, and it was scary. We thought we were going to lose him, but now, thank goodness, he's back and doing incredible concerts too. Let's go to the next one. Let's talk about some of the theories that came out. The first one was the Three Sisters theory. They thought that this giant 3 series of waves came, and because the freighter was so long that it broke into pieces because of those waves. It doesn't hold a lot of credence to me, because the Anderson was right behind it. Because that this storm, you know, he didn't record 3 waves, but there are people right away that came out. A lot of the veterans, they go to the captains to talk about it and said that this series of waves could break up the ship. Anderson was actually longer than Fitzgerald, and it did not break up. Go ahead. The lawsuits came out immediately, and quite honestly, the shipping company said, you can only sue us. Another tribute from a freighter going by. One more long and short. But the lawsuits came out, and the company said we can only be held liable for the cost of the ship and the cargo that was in there. Of course, that was overturned, and there was settlements, but the settlements came out before the Coast Guard even came up with the initial findings of what they found. Roscoe? Liability limit came up. The lawsuits were well over millions of dollars. I know the families didn't receive that much, and it's been something, quite honestly, we don't talk about much, because there's no dollar amount that could ever replace the people who were lost. Here's the Coast Guard Board of Inquiry. I was lucky enough to talk to Jim Wilson. He's point of contention for Dick Orgel, who has talked about some of the findings, and we go over all of the different findings that they've had, because it's really the first material that we got out of it, of facts, towards the investigation. They didn't talk to the cook. Red Bergner said he wanted to testify because he talked about a weak keel, and they never brought him in. In fact, Captain Wilson told me that he just discounted it, which I thought was wrong. Go ahead. Another one of the Coast Guard investigators, the Admiral that came in, and they basically did several months of study using the underwater robot for their findings to come up with whatever they could. Most of the drawings that we've seen, the one that you saw from Jim Clary is very articulate. The ones from the Coast Guard are wrong. I mean, there's much that's wrong in those drawings, including in the Coast Guard report that said that the RDF antenna and the bell were missing. Well, we know that's not true, because they brought the bell up, and it sits now in Whitefish Point. Can you skip? Well, drop down. I don't think you need. Hit the button. We'll see what happens. I'll bet you it'll play the robot. This is Curve 3, and this is some early footage of the robot. This technology in 1976 was pretty revolutionary. This robot was actually used when a B-52 bomber dropped a nuclear weapon after they collided with a tanker. And this robot went down and found it. So when they lost the Edmund Fitzgerald, they thought, what kind of technology could we use to be able to look into the shipwreck? And Curve was the system that they brought in. This is Captain Wilson talking about the buoyancy and about the ship and where he wanted that robot to go down. He was hoping that that robot would go into the tunnels. Those are the areas where we wondered where the water was coming in through. And the pilot of the submarine said, we're not going to go into the tunnels. And he said, well, why not? If you break it, you know, the Coast Guard will pay for it. And the pilot of the submersible said, yeah, but if I break that, I don't have a job, because that's the only one that exists. So eventually he went down there and it wouldn't fit in the tunnel, so it didn't make any difference for them to go around. But to look at the investigation and to talk to Captain Wilson personally about the going off course and all these other things, it lends a lot of to the theories of what was the thoughts of people as they were putting together these theories. And the theory of running aground for me has always been a point of contention, because the Lake Carriers Association, which really runs all of the ships, they're the ones that were really strongly behind that. And the reason for that was because all of these changes were suggested by the Coast Guard. They were saying, we let you go in the water with too much cargo, and the water went into the hatches and they were leaking. So the Coast Guard right away wanted to take out some of that cargo so the ship would ride higher in the water. That's millions of dollars of lost cargo at the end of the season for these shipping companies. The second thing was that the Fitzgerald only had 3 separations in its cargo holds, but they were screened, and they weren't watertight. So when this water got into the Fitzgerald, there was no way to pump it out, and there was no way to stop it from going all over inside the hull. So they said, well, we'll change all the ships. We'll go in and we'll make it so that these sections are watertight. billions of dollars of changes. Columbia had over 20 ships that they would have to change. So as soon as this theory came out that the ship might have hit ground, all of a sudden you see the Lake Carriers Association jumping onto this saying that's what happened. And to me it was insulting because they didn't go near that area, there wasn't a scrape on the bottom, and it just seemed like, again, that there was a blame there. And that's, again, my theory. But when I look at people telling me that it ran aground and it had to, I say, show me one piece of proof other than Cooper's casual glance, and it's just not there. We look at the rip, you can see part of the casualty area when the ship actually tore apart. It wasn't along the welds, and there were a couple of rivets on there that were actually torn out. Go ahead. When the Coast Guard first found the ship, they didn't realize that the stern was upside down. They thought that the robot had flipped over because the name was upside down. And then only then did they realize that it actually had flipped, and this whole bottom section is upright, and this is all, or this is upside down, and this is all upright. Go ahead. Here's the hydrographic survey, the Bayfield that went out to search that area. Again, nothing came out to prove that there was any kind of an area that had a hidden shoal or any area that the Fitzgerald would have went across. And I've talked to crew members that were on board to prove that. Red Bergner is the cook that was on board. You've met Red. He had bone spurs. His foot was hurting him, and the crew called up and said, the Fitz has got one more run. Would you please come on board? He was in Texas, and he called them up and said, no, I'm not going to go. And they said, well, you got to go because Bishop has ulcers. And Bishop ultimately didn't go, but Bergner said he's going to have ulcers whether he goes or not. So I'm not going, you do what you're going to do. And sadly, Bob was the one that was picked to go. Can you give me audio on this?
Because of the inaccuracies that the company, some of the company officials did over and above telling the truth. I told him, I said, look, I had a letter from Mrs. Coleman and Wilhelm's, those families, and you're not taking care of them. And my boss, Bob, says, Red, they got a lawyer. I said, Bob, look, I've been on so many cases with you and Murphy, settling suits that people had against the company, sailed on different ships, mainly on ones I was on, and got hurt on, the crane boats and stuff like that they got hurt on. And whether they were nuisance suits or legitimate. And I had to take them right to the hospital and have the doctor check, and then they'd respond, the company would respond. I saved them an awful lot of money on other things for their company. But for them to whitewash it, and that's what I'm calling it, the hearings on the ship, and it's known, after last night, I talked to one or two people. I don't know whether now, Rick, whether you should, you can cut this out or not. Sure. I don't want to get the guys in trouble. But they know that she's structurally, that this was not safe.
Now, Red was upset because he had heard that those family members weren't going to get their just due in monetary. So literally he told them, I'm going to blow the whistle. He said, I was in Fraser Shipyard wintering the ship. I know that that ship was structurally bad, that the hull was welded where they actually went in and stuffed welding rod and put a bead across the top of it. So there were areas where they repaired the freighter and that there were issues with it. Now, Roscoe's done more research in this than I have, and he's found more people from the shipyard who quite honestly have come forward to say that, that this was part of the issue. So before we get too much into what happened, there's no question it was the storm that sank this ship. The question was, why didn't the Anderson get sunk too? Because it was right behind the Fitzgerald. And why was it the Edmund Fitzgerald? And that's where we're calling into structural problems for it. Go ahead to the next. Oh, go ahead and turn this down. We already talked to the captain about this. When I put this documentary together, it's called the Edmund Fitzgerald Investigations. I really wanted to go through and do something that the other documentaries hadn't done, and that's to go through and interview former crew interview people who built the ship, and also interview people from all of the expeditions. Nobody had an interview from Jean-Michel Cousteau. Nobody had an interview from Whitefish Point, and quite honestly, there was a lot of bad blood between our expedition with Shannon and Whitefish. There was real bad blood to where Whitefish Point, if you ever watch any videos by Whitefish Point, you'll see that Shannon's expedition is never mentioned, and that's part of the deal. They cannot use Whitefish Point museum footage prior to this new regime that came in because if you mention the other expedition. So I was very lucky to be able to get all the pieces and the parts to be able to put it together, and even more so afterwards to literally put all the extra materials that I didn't use in the documentary into a searchable DVD basis afterwards that you can go through. So we're almost done with this probably. I wish you could zap right through it, because see if you can get to the main part. There you go, go to next. We're waiting because the tugboat's on its way, and I just wanted to fill you guys in on some of the other information as the tugboat's coming out. I do invite you, if you want to go up and look with each of the names, the 29 crew members that are there. You can pause and reflect on each one of them, and their titles are on there as well. Why don't we go roll the bow tear real quick to show some of that footage, and then.
Audio?
Yep. How are you on time? How are we on time?
We're just waiting for the tug.
Okay.
If the tug doesn't get here by 8, we'll do
And if there was anybody in the audience too that worked on the Fitz, that that built the Fitz, or would like to come and say a couple of words too, you're more than welcome to. Again, as we wait for a tugboat that's a little overdue. Can you roll it? Go ahead and roll it again. This is that stern section we talked about, and the red anti-fouling paint that's on there. As we go across the bottom, we'll see the tear, and it's ripped like almost like a sheet of paper. I mean, it's incredible, the edges, if you would magnify them, to see that it's not a clean break that we saw on the Carl Bradley or we saw on the Daniel J. Morrell, but literally ripped at the seams where the steel completely ripped off. There's no place to tell whether or not it was, in a certain area that it went down, and we have the midsection of that ship that's mostly buried in the silt, so it's difficult for us to go out there. And quite honestly, in 1994 when we went, we did not do much in that center area at all. Go ahead, hit next. Here's the Coast Guard drawing that was incorrect. This whole anchor pocket is collapsed in. There's a lot more damage on the sides. There's actually, the lake bottom actually comes up to this side equal, and it doesn't show it in there. We talked to the artist of the drawing. He said that the reason that those pieces weren't showing up on there is because he ran out of time. He didn't have enough footage from the underwater robot, so a lot of it he just looked at a freighter and drew it in. So when we look up here, we don't see any of the antennas that were there or the bell that's in there either. Roscoe, next. Here's a side view. This is a telltale part. I was upset when Gordon changed his song that the main hatchways, he would change that, because these first two hatchways did give in. There's 22 hatches on the Fitzgerald, but these front two are collapsed in. And I think that what happened was a big wave had washed up on the deck. She was already taking in water probably when she was flexing, and those waves collapsed those two hatches. I went over them in a submarine. I saw them laying inside the hatch. So when Gordon says that he didn't want to say the main hatchways gave in, he's right in the fact that there's no main hatchway, but 1 and 2 are collapsed in. The NTSB in their report said that this ship literally was inundated with a wave. There's proof in that, in the fact that these were caved in, and if you look at the observation lounge, which is right back here, there's evidence that the wave hit the back of it, blew the windows in, and dented the visor, sun visor that's in there inward instead of backward. So that's what made it take its dive and made it, so quickly. Next.
Yep. Our boat's not going to be here, so in about 2 minutes we're going to have them come up and we're going to do it at the dock.
Okay, good. No boat, so we're going to go out to the dock in just a couple seconds. All right, let's click once on the hatch. On an old freighter, this is how they used to take care of the hatches. And they would put these on the deck, and then they would put tarpaulin over the top of them. When we went to steel hatches and gaskets, the Coast Guard was fairly impressed with the system and said it's not going to leak. So they allowed us to carry more cargo in the freighters. They lowered the load line and allowed them to carry more. Now when the Fitzgerald sank, the instant thing the Coast Guard said was, we're going to rescind those load line regulations because we knew those hatches were leaking. They went into the Herbert Jackson, the sister ship, if you will, of the Fitz. They're not identical. but they could see light around each of the hatches. Almost a 1/16 of an inch gap on there. And the calculation made by the Coast Guard was that it would only take 2 hours of washing waves into like that would cause enough water in there, and because they couldn't pump it out, it would come out. Most people discount that. They think that it's just simply not enough water that would come in, but that the hogging of the ship would have brought enough water in there to make her low enough in the water for that wave to come on. Let's go ahead and roll the video on the hatch clamps. When we talked about the Kessner clamps, here's a hatch cover and a combing coming up right here. Here's those clamps on the bottom. This is on my sub visit, which was the 3rd visit on Delta. We went down, I had an hour on the site. Unfortunately for me, I had studied every other shipwreck but the Fitzgerald in 1994. So now I have all this information in my head and so many questions, and the Canadian government simply won't issue us a permit. And quite honestly, how would you find the $70,000? You know, we heard Fred on the radio or on the phone. It's incredibly expensive. When they brought the bell up, the Native Americans in the casinos actually helped fund it because it was a big thing for the museum. But if you don't have the backing of a museum, or you don't have a backing of the Canadian Navy that helped out, it's impossible to go in and actually do these kinds of things on your own. That's why it was so incredible when Fred Shannon pulled this together, and he called a bunch of us together. I was a television reporter, and he said, we need a camera crew, and he wanted us to pay him to go. And I said, you know, Whitefish Point had already been there the week before. You know, it's already been on my competition TV station. I can't, you know, make my station pay $20,000. So we told Fred that we would offer all of our video services, but we got the video, he gets the video, and it would be a mutual deal. And it worked out really well that way. Let's roll Wilson, and this will be the last ta-da on the hatch clamps.
As she took on water, she went deeper in the water. So now instead of having your 6 foot of freeboard, you have 4 foot. But if you have 4 foot, then the waves breaking across the deck are higher, and they have greater pressure. And they're there more consistently. Stan did some calculations on them. I don't have them. I got them someplace probably. But, you know, and he came up with, if you were taking water on deck and 1/3 of one side of every other hatch was not tight. It only had a 32nd inch gap. Okay. Then, and 10% of the waves were breaking over the hatches.
Go back without a good reason. We know if Bob Ballard put in, you know, he found the Titanic, if he asked, I bet you they would give him permission. Whitefish Point went out with a underwater sonar system, top of the line, somewhat illegally. There's a gray area on whether or not they were allowed to go out there, and they probed the wreck site and came back with a picture that looked like the spar deck or the hatch deck had collapsed into the ship. And now all of us are thinking, we've got to go see it. Now, I think it's an anomaly. I think it's wrong, because I've never seen, and I've seen over 110 shipwrecks underwater, including huge steel vessels. I've never seen that deck collapse like that. I think it's just the way the echo came in, and you can't even tell where the hatch combings are, so there's no way that that just collapsed and it's just an empty hull. There's stuff that would have been in there. So we still want to see it. And they were admonished, the Whitefish Point, they were told, and then they passed a new law in Canada that said you can't even go over with sonar, so they kind of covered that gray area because they want to, you know, keep that off limits. There's only 2 other shipwrecks that the Canadian government protect that way, and that's the Hamilton and the Scourge, which sank in 1812, that Jacques Cousteau had seen, but we can't dive it. So luckily in the Great Lakes, all of these wrecks are open for us to investigate. We can go down and visit any of the wrecks without anybody telling us where we can go. But I do understand the Canadian government. And again, we do talk about how it being, you know, it is a grave site, and nobody thinks about that more than I do. Especially when my dive came up, we had a little bit of battery left in the submarine, and the owner of the tugboat said, if I can take my son down there, I'll give you a deal on the price of the boat. And they went down there, got lost, and found a man on the bottom with a life jacket on. And it was significant. We had headlines for 3 months about that, and quite honestly, it put a totally different twist on it. We were all excited. We were on this massive shipwreck, and it made us really think. And to this day, I still remember that, you know, that footage and think about that lost person. So it did make it a lot more real for us.
We're going to bring Pam up to go out to the dock, and we're going to
Fantastic, Pam.
We're going to bring the reef, and if everyone wants to
Call it out, you know what's going on.
Okay, at the conclusion, we want to thank everyone that came today, and we hope you enjoyed this program. Pam Johnson and her family is going to go out to the rail here, something we do each year. We're going to put the reef in the water, and that'll conclude today's program.
I'm happy to be able to do this tonight with my brother Randall and my daughter Lori. We've all come a long way, put a lot of miles on cars and airplanes to get here.